سيئات ما مكروا وحاق بآل فرعون سوء العذاب. النار يعرضون عليها غدوا وعشيا ويوم تقوم الساعة أدخلوا آل فرعون أشد العذاب. وإذ يتحاجون في النار فيقول الضعفاء للذين استكبروا إنا كنا لكم تبعا فهل أنتم مغنون عنا نصيبا من النار. قال الذين استكبروا إنا كل فيها إن الله قد حكم بين العباد. وقال الذين في النار لخزنة جهنم ادعوا ربكم يخفف عنا يوما من العذاب. قالوا أولم تكن تأتيكم رسلكم بالبينات قالوا بلى. قالوا فادعوا وما دعاء الكافرين إلا في ضلال. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بفضل الله بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله والحمد حقه كما يستحقه حمدا كثيرا. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر تابع له على ذلك. اللهم لعن العصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله. اللهم لعنهم جميعا. ثم الصلاة والسلام على خير خلق الله أجمعين محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. قال الله العظيم في كتابه الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام. And fear Allah through whom you ask one another and the wombs. آمنا بالله. صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. We are living in a material world where everyone tends to make excuses for not fulfilling their duties. But you may ask, are there other duties other than praying, other than fasting, other than giving alms to the poor? Are there other duties upon me? One of the duties that is neglected, and people tend to look at a lot of these other than when we take Salah, Sawm and Hajj, other than fasting and prayers and Hajj, people look at every other action as what? As advisory. Like this is advisable for you to do this. However, one of the things that is spoken about is al-arham. Now if we look at the word ar-raham, we'll look at it in its dictionary translation. Ar-Raham, it says al-qaraba, which means the state of being related by birth, or relationship by virtue of birth, not by marriage, or the state of having the same source or origin or relating to the same family. Relationship, kinship, family, and kindred. So it's family. Now, what is it exactly about family? We'll explain as we move along. If you take a look at your faith, charity always begins where? At home. In fact, how do I make changes in the world? I make changes within myself first. The first one I have to worry about, Allah Azza wa Jal says, alaykum anfusakum. I begin with myself. I have to make myself the best person. Then Allah Azza wa Jal says, qu anfusakum wa ahlikum. Guard or protect yourself and ahlikum, meaning your wife and your children. This is what it talks about. Then another, if we take a look, like firstly, we begin with us, then our immediate family, and then there's what's called al-arham. That's I've just called the subject the kindred, which is your kindred. And the thing is about you as human beings, you weren't brought into this earth to be alone. You were brought into this earth, you were meant to be a community. You were meant, Allah Azza wa Jal says, that we created you from shu'uba, wa asha'ir, wa qaba'il. And the verses in the Quran mentions that you were created of nations, of tribes, of clans. If you take a look, that's how it was in the past. You belong to your clan, you belong to your people, you belong to your tribe. No man is an island, no one was ever alone, you all belong to somebody. And it's important. And in fact, there's emphasis from the first story that you read in the Bible, the first story that you read when it comes to the sons of Adam. Historically, the story that's also mentioned in the Quran is what? The story of Cain and Abel. But the term that's used in the Bible, which is mentioned, people use it up to today, is when Cain is asked about the whereabouts of his brother, what does he respond? He says, I'm not my brother's keeper. In other words, was I supposed to be looking after him? You are your brother's keeper. In this world, you are supposed to be watching other people's backs. To the point that if I'm praying and someone is drowning, my prayer is batil if I don't save them. I have to save them when they're drowning. I have to worry about those that are around me. And I have to watch everyone else's back. I have to look out for people. That's what I'm meant to do. Now, if we take a look at the raham in general, because I need to take a look at what is the religious ruling firstly when it comes to dealing with my arham, my kindred. Secondly, I'll look at what are the limitations of dealing with kindred. Thirdly, I will look at who are people whom we consider to be kindred and the importance of this and so on and so forth. Let's take a look at first what the religious ruling is. See, you need to take a look at many relations that we're commanded to have. One of them is our relationship with our neighbors. Our relationship with our neighbor is an ethical ruling. No marja says it's wajib for you to deal with I can ignore my neighbor. There's no ruling that says that I have to talk to them. I can totally ignore them. But advisory, we are told that your neighbors, and the Prophet used to always tell people to be good to their neighbor. We all know the story about the Prophet ﷺ and the Jewish neighbor that used to throw rubbish. This is the most common story here, where the Jewish neighbor used to throw rubbish in front of the Prophet's house. He would throw it all the time until one day the Prophet came out and didn't find any garbage there. So he went to check on the Jewish neighbor. And then he said, you didn't throw garbage today. You know, something must be wrong. And he finds out that he's ill. So then this Jewish man is overwhelmed that he came to look at him. He said, I've been nothing but a bad neighbor to you. And this is the way that you treat me. We're supposed to treat the neighbors in a good way. We're supposed to treat our friends in a certain way. But is it obligatory? No. All the maraja, all the say this is advisory. This is an ethical matter. This is something that shows good morals and good personal character. However, in the case of your kindred and your relatives, no marja says this is ethical. This is obligatory. This is wajib, meaning if I don't have good relations with my relatives, I am up for punishment. This is what it's about. It's that important. In fact, qat' al-arham, for me to disconnect with my relatives, is considered one of al-dhunub al-kabira. It's considered to be one of the greater sins. So if I disassociate with my relatives, it's considered to be one of the things that I will incur the great punishment of Allah Azza wa Jalla, nastajiru billah. Okay, but what are the limitations when it comes in relation to this ruling? Al-Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam says, "Silu arhamakum bid-dunya bis-salam." Look at this. Yani even to the point where you just say, "Salamu alaykum." He said, at least there's a connection. Salamu alaykum to your relative. Peace be upon you. Whether you send it as a message, whether you call them, that's the minimum. That there's no disconnection. But every relative, your connection differs. If I look at all my relatives, each relative, my connection with that relative differs. For example, if one of your relatives is sick, how do you connect with this relative? If I have a sick relative, I connect with them by asking about their well-being. I connect with them by visiting them. I connect with them how? I connect with a sick relative by praying for them. If one of my relatives is poor, some people don't realize this, that there is a duty upon you that live in this country, and you have relatives in poorer countries. This is a duty. This isn't something where you say, maybe I'm going to... No. If you know someone's poor, your duty is to help them. It's your obligation. Because if the roles were reversed, their duty would be to help you. Because you're in a more fortunate situation than what they are in. So your connection with some people, honestly, you send them $100 and they're over the moon. Thank you very much. You've really helped me. This is a fact. Because their situation is different to yours. Some relatives are the type that enjoy for you just to ask about them. That, so-and-so called me today and they're over the moon, He asked about me. So that's what you do with them. Some relatives, they just want you to leave them alone. They love you, just don't cause them problems. That's how you deal with them. That's how you connect with them, by respecting their wishes and not irritating them. Okay. Al-Imam As-Sadiq alayhi salam mentions this. He says, وَصِلُوا أَرْحَامَكُمْ وَلَيْسَ تَصِلُونَهُمْ بِشَيْءٍ أَفْضَلِ مِنْ كَفِّ الْأَذَى عَنْهُمْ. The best way for you to connect with your relatives is not to harm them, not to cause them harm. So causing them harm is a big issue. It's not something that is small. So we get to the point where we ask, who is considered to be kindred? Who is considered to be a relative? If you want to look at it as let's take a look at it as a hierarchy from top to bottom. Number one of arham are your parents. No one's higher than your parents. Your parents have rights that no one even comes close to having. Why? There are certain times where you can cut off relatives. Did you know that? There are certain rulings where I cut off a relative for. For example, if I have a relative, there's a drug user, and if he comes into my house, he's going to get my kids on the stuff that he's on. I can cut him off because this person's causing problems for me. And if I see I have a relative that doesn't pray, I can take a stance where I stop talking to him till he starts praying. I'm allowed to do this. But with my parents, the laws change. There is no concession. Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَإِن جَاهَدَاكَ, if they strive, and they struggle in a way to make you take partners with me. God says that they strive to make you take partners with me. God says, do not obey them. However, what should I do? I have to keep their company with what? With an appropriate kindness. You know, I should never cut them off, even to the point where some people, the worst things have happened to them from their parents. They ask, how do I deal with them? I say, you pick up the phone. Salam, how are you? Doing well? Because their parents, you know, are predators, for example. I tell them, that's how you talk to them. How are you? Doing well? Thank you very much. Bye. But you're not allowed to seal the deal and say that you're out of my life. The second group are your children. Your children, number one, your children firstly aren't your property. You don't own your children. Your children are al-harm as well. You can't just say, for example, you see those fathers that say to their daughter, if you marry this person, I'll cut you off. What do you think? It's a game you can cut off whoever you want? That's al-harm. You can't cut her off. You can't cut off. Yes, she's disobeyed God in what she's done, not obeying her father, yes, and all this taken into consideration, but you can't just cut off your own child. Your child does something wrong and you say, all right, that's it, you're gone. You're no longer belonging to this family. But they're different to parents. Remember, parents have a higher role. Then you have your siblings. Then the next in this group is who? Some people might ask, where's the wife in this situation, or the husband? The wife isn't raham. The wife goes under another anwin, another category. She goes under a trust because she's been entrusted to you by Allah. Raham, there has to be what do they say, consanguineal, that you've got to have some blood relation with them. You've got to have some kind of blood relation between a husband and a wife. The only case that is if you marry your cousin. If you're married to your cousin, I know, if I'm talking 40 years ago, it would have been normal. You know, most of the people married their cousins. Everyone did. Now, it's out of fashion. Now what's in vogue is what's happening tonight, the SCG. You know? So you take a look, it's out of fashion now, but if I'm married to my cousin, then that is raham. Because after my siblings are my uncles and aunties, and after them are my cousins. Now, the question arises here, is anyone considered to be my relative? There must be a limitation on it, because let's think about it. We're all related, you do know that. Our forefathers are Adam and Eve, so we're all related. We're all related. Someone says, everyone's my raham. No. It's what's traditionally known to be raham. For example, when we take a look at this, ma. You know, when you're doing tahara, has anyone studied the laws of purity? We have what's called ma mutlaq, which means water. That's water in its absolute meaning. So what is water in its absolute meaning? Anything that's called water. For example, tap water is water. Bottled water is water. River water is water. Sea water is water. Because no one goes to the beach and goes, listen, I'm going to swim in the salt water. No one says that. Or no one jumps into a swimming pool and says, I'm going to jump into this chlorinated water. It's considered water. It's called water. So anything that's considered raham, where you say, all right, which is pretty much first and second cousins, and after that, you know, yeah, he's from the family, how you going? That's where it pretty much limits, and that's where we actually stop. And we don't get any further than that. Hello, I can, but it's what is expected of you. I can't cut these people off without religious justification. And I can't give you a list of things because there's many things that could be considered religious justification. Remember, this all applies except to who? Who? Parents. Parents, it doesn't stop. In fact, if you take a look at the narrations when it comes to the parents, you cannot understand where the parents' position is. The parents' position is so high in the eyes of God, and I'll explain why. When you have your own child, you'll know what your parents' position is. For those that don't have children, when a woman is pregnant and she gets that morning sickness and every bit of her body is in pain because she's carrying this child. And the whole time all she cares about is who? this child, except the ones that go for abortions. Everyone else is worried and concerned about the child. Okay? So that's the first thing to look. Alhamdulillah, my mother didn't abort me, because it's the flavor of the day today. It's a flavor of the day. People just press the eject button. That's it, and it's out. But now, you have what? People that carry this child. Let's say the mother gave birth and threw you on the doorstep of an orphanage. Can I cut her off? No. I owe her for the 9 months I had a free ride. 9 months I had a free ride, I owe her for that. Because I used her body as a vessel for me to be there. I owe that to her. This is how Islam works. There's rights. For example, with zakat. Do you know why we pay zakat for cows and takramun and sheep and all that? It's when they graze from the land. You're paying zakat because they're eating from the land. But if you're feeding them grain with your hand, you don't zakihum. You know what I mean? So it comes back to what you owe, what you have taken. Your parents, you've taken so much from them. All the nights you've kept them awake when you were crying, all the dirty diapers that they had to throw out. And at first it's cute, because you're on breast milk. But when you start eating this adults, the stuff that's in the nappy is the same that's you send into the septic tanks every day or two. Same stuff, no difference. They have to change that. They put up with that. Then they put up with your toddler years and all the destruction that you do. Then they put up when you have to go to school, your schooling problems. Every problem. And when you get sick, God forbid, they have to go to the hospital. All this I have to think about. And then I forget, I don't listen to my parents. God says, come here, you ingrate. This recalcitrant runt needs to be punished. They need to be punished because they did not know the meaning of their parents. That's why Allah Azza wa Jal, through His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam says, Al-Jannatu tahta aqdam al-ummahat. That paradise lies beneath the feet of the mothers. Why? Why does God say this? Because you're an ingrate if you do not recognize this. That you do not accept this. This is still cutting off raham. Let's go to the introductory verse that I mentioned. Wattaqullah. When I say wattaqullah, means be on guard or be fearful of what? We say fear God. Is God fearsome? No. Fear God. I'll give you an example. Obviously nothing can be compared to God. But when you've done something wrong and your father has brought you up and said, listen, you've been caught. That moment where you're in fear of the judgment. Not because you think your dad's a bad bloke, but right now, your dad's going to open some serious can on you, and you know this. So when you're in that position, that moment of fear, this is what we're talking about. Be fearful of that moment. Ittaqullah alladhi tasa'aluna bih. What does it mean, alladhi tasa'aluna bih? The one that we always, when we're talking to each other, like when we say Kirmel Allah, Allah yurda alayk, we say for the sake of God, for God's sake, may Allah be pleased with you, could you do this? Well, we tend to ask each other through God to do things. Sometimes you ask someone, do me a favor, and you say no, and he says, Kirmel Allah, for God's sake, will you do it? You say, okay, for God's sake, in this position. And then God says, wal arham. This is the first verse in Surah An-Nisa. It mentions wal arham and the arham. What does he mean wal arham? Fi what? Fi disconnecting the arham. Because we have narrations that say that you will not even smell the scent of paradise if you cut off your relations. What are the benefits of connecting? That narration I told you, there's a lot of them. It's not one, there's heaps. That's why I didn't want to quote one of them. You go through, you'll find there's many of them about what will happen to those that cut off their relations. But let's take a look at what are the benefits of connecting with my relations. قال أبو جعفر الإمام الباقر صلوات الله وسلامه عليه. In this hadith he says Silatul Arham. And he mentions Silatul Arham, and he mentions in this 5 benefits from connecting with your relatives that you gain in this world. Firstly, he says, تزكي الأعمال. تزكي الأعمال meaning your actions become purified. How? A lot of the times you're making connections with relatives, you really don't want to do this. So you know there's a relative you just don't want to sit with. You got a cousin that always launches rockets, you just don't want to sit with them. But you sit with them for the sake of God. So while you're sitting there, you're doing it purely for what? You're doing it purely for Allah. Purifies your actions. I'm around them purely for God. I'm only sitting here. You know, sometimes you go to an event and you put on a fake smile. You don't want to be there. But imagine I sit with a relative and I have that moment where I really don't want to be there, but I'm doing it solely for God. It purifies my actions. Because then I have that intention where I'm working for Allah Azza wa Jal. Then the Imam says, وَتُنْمِ الْأَمْوَالِ. It brings about an increase in wealth. When you are around your family and you're with your family, if you take a look at one of the things that, for example, take a look at networking or social networking and starting to know more people, it opens up more avenues for you in life. Many more avenues it opens. This is not the reason why. I'm just saying this is possibly one of the reasons. But it increases your wealth. How it's done, Allah Azza wa Jal makes the way, but it increases your wealth. The third thing the Imam says, وَتَدْفَعُ الْبَلْوَى. It repels misfortune. That when I'm good with my relatives, yeah, you know, sometimes people, they have miserable lives. They're very upset. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in a hadith, he says to Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam, let's see if I can quote it right or I'll paraphrase. He says, Sir sanatain, that for you to have happiness for 2 years, bibir walidayk. He says, by being good to your parents, you'll have 2 years of happiness. Every time you do good to your parents. And then he says, Sir sana, if you want to be happy for a year, he says, Sir arhamak. He says, Taban, I'm giving you, this is not verbatim, I'm paraphrasing what the hadith says. He says, be good to or connect with your relatives. It will give you happiness. Allah Azza wa Jal says, and He will take away misfortune. وَتُيَسِّرَ الْحِسَابِ. Connecting with your relatives makes the account on the Day of Judgment easy upon you. It doesn't make it difficult, it eases it upon you. And then he says, وَتُنْسِئُ فِي الْآجَالِ. And it delays your appointment with death. In other words, it prolongs your life. So it gives you 5 benefits for you to be good with your parents. Now, see, one of the biggest problems is when I'm dealing with a lot of my relatives. You say, all right, this guy's good, I like to be around them. Sometimes you have that relative that doesn't want to connect with you. They've cut you off. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam says in this hadith, لا تقطع رحمك وإن قطعتك. Okay? Do not cut off your relatives even if they cut you off. So say someone doesn't want to talk to you, you still try and make an attempt to talk to them. You'll get this. Sometimes you'll see a relative, you say, Assalamu alaikum, they won't respond to you. Or sometimes you say, how are you going? They don't want to talk to you. They don't know you. But it doesn't tell them to stop. Your duty with God is to continue. It's just like when you say, for example, Assalamu alaikum to someone and they don't say alaikum assalam. You've fulfilled your duty, they haven't fulfilled theirs. It doesn't mean I stop doing what my duty is. My duty is to do or act in a certain way. So I'm not allowed to cut off even those that cut me off. In fact, Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam narrates a hadith which is mind-boggling. Because you know, when it comes for me to give charity, we have a tendency to give charity to who we like. You know, I like this organization, I'll pay them. Or I like this relative, I'll give them. I like Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam is asked, Su'ila Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam, ayyu sadaqati afdal. Which charity is the best charity? Which is the afdal? Which charity is the best form of charity? Hala, sadaqah doesn't only mean charity, also means a good act. Which is the best act that I can do? Sadaqah is a good act to another person. Whether it's helping them financially, whether it's helping them physically, whether it's helping them morally. Who is the most important? The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam says, ala di rahmil kashih. Afdalus sadaqah is for a relative that the word the Messenger uses sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam is al-kashih. What does kashih mean? Kashih is someone that is hostile. You know that relatives that bears animosity to you, doesn't wish you good. That relatives always has it in for you, always plotting and planning against you. That's who you have to be best to. That's who I have to do the best deed to. The rahmil kashih. Taban, there are points, remember I said, where it's different. For example, I'll give you an example of where it's different. When Nabi Musa punished Qarun, why did he punish Qarun? Who was Qarun to Nabi Musa? Qarun was Nabi Musa's cousin, wasn't he? He was his maternal cousin. He was Raham. But Qarun, do you know what he did? Qarun paid an illicit woman to come out in front of everyone and to tell the people that Musa was with her the night before. This is what he did. فَغَضِبَ Musa. Musa became angered because this is something huge. So there you don't get in the narration where God says, listen, Qarun's your cousin, sort it with him. No. When Musa says, I want to punish him, Allah gives him permission to punish him. He says to Musa, go punish him. And then Musa goes up to Qarun and orders the earth to swallow him. And Allah at no point says to Musa, listen, he's your cousin, cut him some slack. Because this is different. What he's done is something that's far different to anything that can be fixed in this manner. Qarun wasn't someone, he was someone that was working completely against the Nabuwah. Working in a way, even though he was the cousin of Musa, there is some limitations. That's why in certain situations I'll have to ask my marja, what is a situation, if my situation is a situation where I should react to or not. But sometimes the situation is involving money, sometimes it involves something far greater than this that people cannot fix. Like for example, sometimes you have families, they're brothers, they're good friends, they've been friends for a very long time, and then they get married. And their spouses cause animosity between brothers. For example, two brothers are in a business. While they're working, they've got their, say for example, they take from the money at work to buy lunch. One of the brothers always takes money to buy lunch and drinks, but the other one always has his lunch packed at home by his wife. So the wife, he comes home, his wife goes, does your brother's wife pack him any lunch? First mistake is this guy actually responds and tells her. The correct response, I don't care what any of the sisters say. The correct response to tell your wife is none of your business what goes on between me and my brother. I'm not here to win fans with the sisters. This is the actual answer you give. What happens between me and my brother stays between me and my brother. That is the actual response you're supposed to give. This is your family. Your brother is your blood. Remember that. It's very important. As long as her haqq reaches her, she has nothing to do between you and your brother. So this brother turns around and goes, you know what? Yeah, my brother's wife doesn't pack him anything. He always buys lunch. All right, where does he get the money to buy the lunch? Oh, he gets it from the till or, So he uses the money at work. How much does he actually spend per day? Yeah, I don't know, probably 20, 25 bucks. So 20 bucks by 5, that's $100 a week. In a year, that's $5,000. You know what? He should be paying you $2,500 a year. And you sit there and think, $2,500? that can fix a blown head gasket or something, you know. Something I've got to do something about. I've got to make an issue right now. And what happens? The family breaks apart. Over what? Over just a question that you shouldn't have responded to from the very beginning. What happens when I do this? When I allow for this thing to happen, Amir al-Mu'mineen, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi, says, إذا قطعوا الأرحام جعلت الأموال في أيدي الأشرار. And this happens. You see, when people break families apart, then they go through courts. And where does the money go to? The legal system. The lawyers. Lawyers are sitting there laughing all the way to the bank. Okay? The money goes towards the lawyers. The money goes in litigation. And what happens? Maintenance. You know, paying all this stuff and whatever needs to be paid. Why? Because I answered a question that I shouldn't have answered. Why should I answer it? Because it's none of the person's business that's asking me. I work for my money. How I spend my money is my business. As long as your haqq is there, you've been paid, you've been looked after. And everyone's been looked after. So you're not there to ask me about how my money is spent in this way. The reason I've given this example, because this happens a lot. It's not a one-off thing. In one narration, where Imam al-Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamu alayh, and this narration, ajib, it's a strange narration. Do you know he's on his deathbed? And he starts to say, because you know you have a third of your inheritance. The Imam had money. Imam al-Sadiq was one of the Imams that had money. Not like Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, not like Rasulullah. He actually had money at the end, and he was giving it out to his relatives. His 1/3, he was telling them who to give it to. And the names he was giving were names of the relatives that were never around. And one of the names he actually mentions is one that was an enemy to the Imam. Al-Hasan ibn Ali ibn al-Hussein. You know, Al-Hasan, the son of Imam Zayn al-Abidin, was a person that actually took out a dagger and attempted to kill Imam al-Sadiq. Imagine this. So he says to them, give Al-Hasan ibn Ali ibn al-Hussein, give him 70 dinars. So they say, Yabna Rasulullah. This is someone that attempted at your life, took an attempt at your life. Why do you want to give him? The Imam mentions that the verse in the Quran says, وَالَّذِينَ يَصِلُونَ مَا أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِهِ أَنْ يُوصَلْ وَيَخْشَوْنَ رَبَّهُمْ وَيَخَافُونَ سُوءَ الْحِسَابِ. And those, talking about the people that join what Allah, or connect to what Allah has ordered to be connected, in the relatives. And they fear their Lord and are afraid of their account. In other words, he's letting you know, سوء الحساب, the hard account on the day of judgment is for who? It's for those that cut off their relatives, cut off their relations. This is the importance of this, that I don't cut off my relations, because there is an account for me to be accounted with, and I need to be aware of this. Because when that account comes, I don't want to be one of those people that's lagging behind. The reason why we give these discussions, my dear brothers and sisters, is a reminder. It's a reminder that this world is transient. At any moment, your name gets called up. Just make sure before your name is called up that you fixed what needs to be fixed. I know it's adhan, thanks to all your phones, and you got these apps. You must think you're awesome with them. But anyway, we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to forgive us our transgressions and to allow us to connect with those that have cut us off of our relatives, and to show us the way to improve our relationships with them. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal not to take us from this world until He is pleased with us. We ask Allah to hasten the reappearance of our master Al-Hujjat ibn al-Hasan Al-Mehdi arwahuna fida. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. اللهم قل لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات وإلى أرواح موتانا وموتاكم ولقضاء الحوائج وغفران الذنوب وشفاء المرضى وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والشهداء والعلماء رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.